We all know what it's like to live in a recession, but the Great Depression took things to a whole new extreme, putting millions out of work. It is easily the greatest economic downturn in human history. However, given that it happened almost 100 years ago, there's still a lot that most people don't know about this major event. So today, we're going to be counting down the top 10 things you didn't know about the Great Depression. But before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notifications bell so that you don't miss out on all of our latest content. Number 10, almost no one lost money from investments. There's a widespread belief that people across the US were investing in stocks throughout the Roaring '20s. And while it's true that many of those who did invest lost nearly everything, most people had nothing to do with the stock market. In fact, according to economist John Galbraith, in 1929, the member firms of 29 different exchanges reported a total of just over 1.5 million customers, with about 90% of them being customers of firms in the New York Stock Exchange. And while that may seem like a large number, since about 120 million people were living in the United States at the time, it only accounted for about 1% of the population. Therefore, almost no one lost money from investments during the Great Depression. Number 9. Its peak was not in 1929. While many would think that the peak of the Great Depression would be during its initial year, this was not the case. Instead, the worst years of the Depression were between 1932 and 1933. This was the case because there were several banks and factories that failed during this time frame. Additionally, 1932 to 1933 were also the years of the Depression that had the highest unemployment rate and the lowest total GDP. However, after the effects of the first New Deal began to have an impact, the employment rate and total GDP of the United States improved almost every year afterwards. Number 8, the federal government was useless. Today, it is widely understood that it is important for the government to support people financially during a recession. However, in the 1930s, the government had no idea of how to handle the situation and actually thought that balancing the budget was the only way to come out of the Depression. Unfortunately, both Democrats and Republicans believed in this doctrine, and as a result, the first few years of the Great Depression were economically stagnant. However, once Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is better known as FDR, assumed the presidency in 1933 and enacted the first and second New Deals, the economy finally began to take a significant turn for the better. Number 7, buying on margin. Although this is illegal today, back in the 1920s, investors could buy stocks on margin. This was similar to getting a mortgage on a house, as investors would make a down payment up front and then pay for the remaining value of the stocks using the dividends they received in the future. However, the problem with this system was that the price of down payments was extremely low, often being only 10% of the purchase price. As a result, once the market crashed, many investors had no way of paying them back as they were receiving extremely low dividends on an extremely expensive asset. Number 6, investment trusts exploded. Investment trusts, which are the equivalent of today's mutual funds, exploded during the 1920s. These were essentially collections of stocks and bonds, and what made them so popular was the fact that they were diversified and managed by an expert. However, a major issue with them was the fact that the actual value of the stocks in these trusts were often not made public. As a result, owners of these investment trusts would sell them at a premium in order to make additional profit. Thus, when the market eventually crashed, those who bought them on margin had little means to pay them back, as the dividends they were creating were worth much less than their original purchase price. Number 5. The First New Deal. A lot of you have probably heard this phrase thrown around a lot, but what exactly does it mean? Well, the First New Deal is the term used to describe the laws enacted during FDR's first 100 days in office. Beginning in early 1933, the most significant things implemented were the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, the Banking Act, and the National Industrial Recovery Act, or NIRA. The CCC was valuable as it employed millions of men to work in forestry and conservation projects. These men were given room and lodging in a CCC camp, and in exchange for work would have relief checks mailed out to their families. The Banking Act was valuable as it provided insurance for the money that Americans stored in banks, increasing public trust in the banking system. As a final note, the NIRA was valuable as it helped increase the salaries of workers and unions while establishing agreed-upon prices for goods. In tandem, all three of these acts helped stimulate the economy. Number 4. The Second New Deal. While the First New Deal helped many Americans, it wasn't enough. This led to FDR initiating the Second New Deal in early 1935. The two most significant laws implemented were the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, and the Social Security Act. The WPA was valuable because, like the CCC, it employed millions of unemployed people, with most of them being sent to work in construction, road work, and, believe it or not, drama, art, and music. Yet, the Social Security Act was also significant as it created a retirement fund for workers over the age of 65, and it was something that was paid for by worker contributions throughout their working career. In tandem, these two pieces of legislation helped fuel America's weak economy. Number 3. Some industries flourish. With millions out of work and the economy in a slump, the majority of industries didn't do so well during the Great Depression. However, escapist industries, which were any industries that cured boredom and allowed people to forget their hardships, did extremely well. Two great examples of this are the movie and cigarette industries, as both occupied the time of the unemployed and made them feel good. That's why even during the COVID-19 pandemic, modern escapist industries such as YouTube and Netflix are doing better than ever. Number 2. Suicide rates barely increased. It is widely believed that suicide rates spiked during the Depression. After all, the complete financial devastation experienced by many was undoubtedly stressful. However, between 1928 and 1929, the amount of suicides per person in New York City, which was the financial capital of the US, only went up by about 3%. Therefore, it seems that the majority of people were not as broken as the history books tend to make it seem. Number 1. Crime increased during the Depression. With few jobs available and very little in the way of disposable income in most people's pockets, many young men turned to crime in order to make a living. And while crime across the board increased, the main driver of crime was the Prohibition Act. In place since 1920, the Prohibition Act made alcohol consumption illegal, and as a result there was a lot of money to be made bootlegging beer, wine, and spirits. With men employed nationwide to produce, transport, and sell alcoholic beverages, this led to massive spikes in the homicide rate due to the rivalries between various bootlegging gangs. However, by 1933, FDR decided that enough was enough and dropped the Prohibition Act. This made alcohol legal once again and helped to decrease America's crime rate. That's all we have for you today, guys, and thank you all for watching. Let us know in the comments down below what your favorite Great Depression fact was. And if you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notifications bell so that you don't miss out on all of our latest content.